Hello, all my entrepreneurs and business leaders, and welcome to the Michael Esposito Show, where I interview titans of industry in order to inform, educate, and inspire you to be great. My guest today is the managing partner of Compound Wealth Advisors, LLC, and is on a mission to make financial advice a noble profession. Please welcome Stuart Schiffman.
Thank you so much.
Welcome, Stuart. So we were just talking off mic a little bit about the purpose of this show and why I'm doing this show and why you're here today. And I think to answer your question, which was, who are we speaking to in our audience? My audience, I imagine, consists of entrepreneurs, solopreneurs who are starting out. And I think we use the word entrepreneur very freely these days. I think it's definitely a buzzword. Mm-hmm. But you have this small business owner who's also an entrepreneur. You have all these different people that are starting out in new professions. And these are the people that I'm trying to speak to. So using the word entrepreneur is speaking to the small business owner, the solopreneur, the person who's trying to blaze their own path. And part of the show is to interview other entrepreneurs like yourself to, through your stories, your experiences, to be able to help guide them, maybe not to make the same mistakes that you made, or help them understand that maybe the mistakes that they're making are normal and it's okay. And there's a light at the end of the tunnel. And on the other end, what I classify as my business leaders are the individuals who work in a corporation or in a large business and function as an entry-level employee and are trying to maybe become a sales executive or higher level into a C-suite type of person and going that route. And so your experiences can help them because there's a lot of entrepreneurship that happens while trying to climb the corporate ladder. But I also interview other people who are CEOs or CFOs of larger corporations and have climbed the corporate ladder. And again, through their experiences, through their stories, can help that individual at the entry level or at the senior account manager level or director or whatever it is to be able to get to the C-suite.
Sure.
And
there's another term you might want to think about.
Please.
It's called intrapreneurship.
Oh, tell us about it.
I've worked for many companies who wanted to start new ventures within the company. And I was often the gentleman who volunteered to start that process through sales and prospecting, new avenues, new markets.
Yeah, so entrepreneurship would be the entrepreneur within the corporation. Mm-hmm. So you said that you did that?
Yes, often. Mm-hmm.
Tell me a story about that.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, so many, right?
Yeah.
Well, what we could do is we could lead into that, which will be really nice because I have a feeling that has to do with your experience out in California, right?
And New York even.
And New York?
Yeah, even in New York. I remember working, the first time I tried entrepreneurship was when I was working for a Wall Street firm in New York. And typically in the capital markets room, the trading room of a big brokerage house, you have your salespeople and you have your traders. Except I did something different. I became a hybrid between the two. And I sat on the trading desk, but I was selling. And I was selling to Fortune 500 treasurers and finance officers to see if they were interested in buying back debt they had issued previously. Mm-hmm. And there was a whole big market there.
So you just took that on your own?
I took that on and I became sort of like an investment banker in a trading room.
So when you decided to do this, did you have to go through certain hoops in order to kind of carve your own way in this business?
A little bit. I had been successful at a prior firm doing something similar, and the word got out, and then this fellow who saw what I was doing wanted me to come over to his shop and do the same thing and introduce this new avenue of sales that could help the entire corporate bond sales.
So you had already done something similar to it, and so there was already a little bit of faith in there. So what about the first time that you did it then? What was that experience like to be able to get that to?
That was a little trickier.
That I would imagine.
Yeah, because you're in these rooms, you have the capital traders who are protecting the firm's capital, and you have the salesmen who are trying to use the firm's capital to facilitate a trade. So they're in conflict with each other. And if you have both those roles at the same time, you don't know if you should be reporting to the head of trading or head of sales. And so my position became, it becomes, if there's a type of political issue, it becomes a bit tenuous.
Right.
Yeah.
So when you were trying to figure out which one to report to, I guess, right? Is that what it was? That's when you kind of started seeing a different path of maybe there's something else I can do here?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes,
and so who did you end up having to go to in order to kind of get the approval to do that?
Well, gosh, what happened was that I was reporting to the head of sales, but I sat on the trading desk. And it became convoluted at the end of the year when I'm trying to say, look, all that I accomplished. And they're saying, well, no, you're, because the way my reporting line was to sales, but the traders knew what I had done, but the salespeople didn't. It was a little tricky.
And so you had to kind of show them the value in which one it was.
Yeah.
So that, I mean, and those are the hoops that I think that a lot of entry level or, like I said, sales executives have to jump through in a corporation or in a large business. I had a guest on previously, and he talked about something very similar that he didn't identify as entrepreneurship, but I would assume it was. It was kind of taking on different roles even outside of the business hours of, hey, look, my job ends at 5, but I'm going to learn more about this other role, and I'm going to start contributing towards that other role as well. And that's how he got tapped on the shoulder to rise in the ranks and everything. And it sounds very similar to what you're talking about too, is that you didn't just follow your job where it was like, this is the description and this is what I'm supposed to do and I'm just going to report to this person and just put my head down and go. You kind of picked your head up and said, well, I think there's a better idea here.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And sometimes that works well and sometimes it doesn't.
Yeah. But that's what an entrepreneur is. I mean, which is what you are today. Yeah. It's you see that there's a better way to do something and you can't live without telling everybody about that better way.
That has been the bane of my existence.
Well, and I have a feeling because it tends to be very these kinds of things that we do later on in life tend to relate back to our childhood, and I'm interested in learning a little bit more about your childhood. You shared a little bit in your bio about your religious background and some stories there. So I'm assuming that religion had a big impact on your childhood and on where you are today. And I just wonder what experiences you may have had growing up that got you into finance, that got you into entrepreneurship, into leadership roles that you are in today.
Gosh, there's a lot to cover there. I was, what you're referring to, we had talked about a little bit, was the golden rule, right? You treat other people the way you want to be treated yourself. And so I naturally gravitated to leadership positions, and people probably saw that in me, and maybe that's why they elected me to, class president and all these things that I did. But the corporate world was a little different, I think, and it became. It's interesting if you go out and look back to see how you became what you were. There's a famous line my daughter she came home one time and said, "You don't know what you don't know," and there's a lot of things you can do with your life that you don't even know it even exists out there. But but the more you know yourself and you keep looking, then you'll find things that resonate with you.
Right. That you relate to.
Right. So, so one day I'm looking in my mother's drawers and I found this coin and it was a silver dollar. And I said, what is this? Because I thought currency was paper, not coin. And I looked at this thing and I asked what it was. And she said, that's $1. And I thought, well, gee, this is 1887 or something coin, and I just became fascinated with currency and the history, and the history led me to understanding. Became interested in politics and economics and capital markets, and I didn't really know anything about Wall Street. My first jobs, when I got to New York, though, I just became fascinated with Wall Street and those kind of jobs. But mostly because I just had a facility with numbers, and I enjoyed the understanding of how supply and demand came together.
I like that the story starts with this coin and thinking and going back to 1887 and just thinking, okay, what was that like, and how did they use this and exchange it and everything? And what's what I like about this story is that it's kind of like a story led you to where you are today. Is that your fascination wasn't, from what I understand, is it wasn't initially with numbers. It was more with the story of what is this coin and what is currency and how does it work, and that's what kind of got you into the profession.
What is it worth?
Right.
Why is it worth $1 or is it worth more than $1? Why is it worth more than $1?
Right. Why is
Why?
it? That it's pretty wild. And so the other thing that you mentioned in there was that you were fascinated. And I think when we're, as entrepreneurs and business leaders, when we're thinking about our profession and we're thinking about what should I do and what field should I go into, I think a fascination, we say passion so much. Passion is like the big word to use constantly is passion, and I use it regularly as well. But a fascination, I like that you use that word, is you were fascinated by it. And I think that when we are fascinated by something, then we are inspired, then we're passionate, then it just snowballs into this like fulfillment into your career, which is what led you to where you are today. So you ended up going down this financial path. So you graduate school, and what was your first profession? Was it on Wall Street then, or?
Well, I went to New York, and I actually started a position at an accounting firm. It didn't work out very well because I thought it was so boring. I had to keep changing pens because I was so bored. I wanted different colors to work with. I was so bored with accounting. But I wound up staying in New York. I wound up getting an MBA. And during the course of going to school, I took a number of part-time positions with very interesting firms. I remember working for the investment banking group of Schroders Bank in New York, learning about venture capital. I worked for the First Boston Corporation in their equity research department. And when I was actually that was a very interesting one because they took me down to the trading floor. That was the first time I ever saw a trading floor. And I just immediately fell in love with it. People jumping up and down, you'd be screaming one moment and then laughing the next, and all that. Really like an anti-corporate environment.
Can we stay there for a second? Because I never understood the trading floor. I've never understood that. Buy, sell, screaming on a trading floor. Why couldn't it be done through some sort of automation or and even back then, like the ticker tape and all that stuff. Like I don't understand why there's people holding their paper in the air, screaming something, and who on the other end of any of this is understanding what's happening. Like how do they know to listen to you saying sell and then listen to that person say buy or whatever? What's going on there? I need you to pull the veil out for me.
You have to be an intensity junkie to love that kind of environment because you're listening to everyone around you at the same time you're trying to facilitate trades to the customers you're talking to at the same time. So you're getting information constantly around you and then you're communicating it at the same time. So you're following the news of the day, you're communicating that to your clients, you're trying to set up trades, facilitate trades between buyers and sellers who are your clients. And at the same time, you're hearing people screaming in the background, I've got this to sell, I got this to buy. And you're trying to help them as well. So it becomes a maelstrom of information.
So the only thing I could think of is that in that moment, you become like an athlete, super hyper-focused, and you're in your zone. And it's almost like, is there like silence around you in that moment where you almost don't hear the noise, but hear the information that you need?
It's kind of like driving a car very fast on the highway when and you wake up and you realize you're 100 miles down the road. You're going down the path, you're taking in all the information around you, but you're still traveling down the road and you're still driving your car.
Yeah, it's an intensity, I guess. I could only relate to like what you just said is in a car or in sports. Getting all that information at once would be like my head would explode. I was watching there's a couple of YouTube videos actually of some videos of the 1980s and 70s, I think it was the late 70s into 80s, of people in the offices and having two phones to their ear and talking to one and putting one down and picking one up. And I don't know, did you have that experience too at some point in your career?
Yeah, I only had one phone, but I saw the evolution of. I remember in the early 80s, it was almost like a library. The capital markets rooms were like libraries. you'd have offices, and each salesperson would have their office and a little desk lamp, and it was very quiet. And then in the mid-'80s, this evolution came about because they wanted everyone to be hearing each other and exchanging information and moving faster. So they got rid of those rooms and they put everyone seat to seat right next to each other. And you'd be divided by the type of work that you did. If you worked on just corporate bonds, you'd be in the corporate bond department. If you worked on government treasuries, you'd be in the government area. Mm-hmm. And they divide you up again between short duration paper and long duration paper. And then have the equity guys in another room, and they have the hybrids, right? They have the convertible bond people and the preferred stock people, and everyone would have their own little desks.
You know, what's funny that you say that is I'm thinking about the world we live in now in the, let's call it the tech world. I was going to say social media world, but the tech world. And I'm thinking about some social media companies that are big on this, like Facebook for one, which was to break down the cubicle walls. And so you're talking about this in the 80s, and then cubicles came back in the 90s and 2000s, and everybody got a cube or an office space, and that's like, everybody wants an office. That's what they want. But what you just said is that what you realize and what they realize in the 80s is that there's a lack of communication when you build these walls and you have these cubicles. Mm-hmm. And Facebook was one of the tech companies that I am aware of that were one of the first ones that said, we're going to remove all these walls. And that's where you hear famously that Mark Zuckerberg sits in the center of the office with no walls, no special office for him, and he sits in the middle so that he can hear what you just said, listening to what's going on around him and the engineers and the issues and the solutions and all these different things, and everybody could be a part of it. Mm-hmm. And so this was something that sounds like was developed by the financial industry.
You're multitasking all the time. Mm-hmm.
Which is, I think, just really great for people to hear is that it's so important. Like I think that most of us think that getting to a part in our career of a C-suite or business owner is to have this beautiful office and close the door and walls and have all paintings around you and everything, right? When really, to be successful, you need to hear what's going on around you and you need to be in the center of it all. I would think, right?
Well, you need to be hyper-focused at the same time, yes.
Yeah. I'm interested to hear a little bit more about in those experiences that you just shared with us, some of the learning that you got from it. And you mentioned you learned a lot through the VC firm and through the equity resources. I think VCs we're familiar with of the venture capitals and how they inject money into businesses in order to be able to grow. What was the equity research that you did, and what did you learn from that?
Gosh, I have a very interesting background, quite unique probably, in the sense that I've worked on what's called both the buy side and the sell side. The buy side is the money management side, and the sell side is the institutions that are actually selling new issues, new company stock or new bonds to those money managers. And I learned a lot about capital market flow and how money is moved from one area to the other and why and under what conditions and how often and how big they are and what to look out for when these major movements of money happen. Mm-hmm. For example, end of quarter pensions, which rule the money management area, are moving money and doing reallocation. So you have to be aware of if they're moving more money out of stocks and into bonds or somewhere else.
So you learned a lot there, and I'm assuming that learning experience is helping you understand, or maybe you could help us understand Bitcoin, because there's a lot of movement of money, and like you just said, there's a lot of movement going on, and I think for the most part, we don't really understand what's going on there and what is Bitcoin, right? I've recently Googled it and tried to watch some YouTube videos on it. I'm still not very clear as to what Bitcoin is.
Michael, you and I are probably in the same boat on that one. I've done my homework and I've researched it, and I'm still trying to get my head around it in terms of what is actually why it's valued the way it's valued, and that's always been a thought pattern in mine. You talked before about equity and why is a stock worth what a stock is?
Right.
Why is Bitcoin worth what it is?
Right.
And that's a conundrum to me in the sense that it's not really a store of value. It's not a good exchange of value. It's highly volatile, but it has a community behind it that believes in it, and they're the ones that are going to be using it and and moving it forward.
And from my research is that it's going to depreciate. It depreciates rather quickly. Not on the trading floor, but in terms of and maybe I'm misspeaking here, but let me take a step back here and explain my understanding of it first, and then maybe you can clear this up for everybody to understand. So from the little research that I've done through YouTube personalities, so let's make that disclaimer that it wasn't anybody prominent that I got this from, but my understanding is that you have Bitcoin miners, which is what makes up the blockchain. And the Bitcoin miners, they mine and they have to solve a mathematical equation within 10 minutes. Or it takes 10 minutes to solve the equation. And the best answer or the right answer at the 10-minute mark that's received goes into the blockchain. And that person, that miner, is then paid a certain amount of Bitcoin for solving the equation. And here's where I'm talking about the depreciation, is that my understanding is that person gets in solving that and getting part of the blockchain and keeping, which is, by the way, the blockchain is a log of all of the different Bitcoins. And that person gets paid, I forget exactly the first number, but it was like, let's say 128 Bitcoins, which then very quickly drops down to 64 Bitcoins, which then drops down to 32. And then from where it is today, or my understanding of that last video that I just watched, is at 12 Bitcoins. So therefore, they mined it became 12 Bitcoins. And then the conclusion of what I had received in terms of information was that by something like 2048, that Bitcoin will no longer have any value. So you're nodding your head yes in all of that so far. So please share your side to that.
Right. So it's not so much that it depreciates, it's actually appreciating because it gets harder and harder to make additional Bitcoins.
Okay.
So as you pull back on supply, there's less and less available. Mm-hmm. Any increased demand is going to shoot the price up.
Mm-hmm. And so that's called appreciation.
Yes.
So
yes.
Describe
appreciation in the sense that the price is likely to go up, not down, because you have less supply.
Okay. So and that's what's going to happen with Bitcoin, is that there's going to be less supply.
A finite supply. Yes.
Right.
Yes.
And so do you think what made me here's the conclusion I drew from that video, and it sounds like because I'm so financially uninformed, I will say that, is that by 2048 then, which is the date that they use in that video. So I don't really know what Bitcoin or any experts in the field would really say, but this person is a YouTube expert. By 2048, does that mean that Bitcoin would no longer exist, or it would actually have more value because there's no more of the resource available?
More value because it becomes impossible to add any more Bitcoins to the supply. Okay,
so it's almost like the treasury has closed its doors.
Exactly.
Because that's the other part, is that they don't have a treasury. Bitcoin is the treasury, or the blockchain is the treasury, right? I forget which way it goes. But that's it. So the doors are closed. We can't print any more money, is really what it comes out to. So that's interesting. And we're not giving any investment advice, but that's pretty interesting then to hear that if there's no more that could be made in 2048.
Of Bitcoin, but then there's going to be other cryptocurrencies. And there's as you know, many others that are bidding for that top seat. And they all have their different communities of support.
Right.
So that's what's in my mind. How can you possibly value this when they just invent more cryptocurrency, another medium?
And from your perspective, and if you don't know the answer to this, that's perfectly fine. We could move on from Bitcoin. But how do you see Bitcoin playing into, because you're in financial planning and retirement planning and in that area there, how do you see it playing into portfolios for people's future, for people's retirement?
It's a great question. I don't know. I really don't have an answer to that. It's, from what I've looked at so far, it doesn't really create an additional asset class that I would want to add to that portfolio. It doesn't give me the diversification that I'm looking for, because it's not riding in an opposite direction from the stock market. And therefore, it's not adding value to the portfolio.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And the other question I would have in that would be, in your experience and in your knowledge of the financial industry, is there anything Bitcoin that would have been like a very similar social movement or financial movement that maybe the experts and analysts at first said kind of a response like that of like, I don't see it being something that's viable and then became viable? Is there anything in your in the history that you know of the financial industry?
Oh, sure. The tulip bulb craze.
What's that?
The tulip bulb craze back in I think that was the 18th century or 17th century.
Oh, tulip bulb, like
tulip
the plant.
Bulbs. Right. And back in Holland, people believed that a tulip bulb was so valuable, and they had different types of flowers, and each these different bulbs were supposedly so important to have and own, and the price just kept going up, and they kept trading these tulip bulbs, and finally one day it just crashed, and they were worth nothing.
Oh,
and to me, this could be a tulip bulb craze.
That's very interesting. So I'm sure that there's a lot more of these types of things. And is there anyone that you knew of that became successful that we know of today that we're like, oh, that was kind of like a fad that turned into something successful? Or
you mean from other crazes?
Yeah, similar to a Bitcoin type of thing.
Well, it's interesting. I think there's a lot of hobbyists out there that collect all kinds of things.
Mm-hmm.
Andy Warhol paintings. I mean, who knows what the next
create a
great,
tremendous value around it.
Yeah, the next great collectible might be.
Right. Cool. So going back to our real lives, outside of the Bitcoin matrix that we just involved ourselves in, I want to go to your story of California and what drew you out to California. And you ended up in a pretty significant leadership role where led you to where you are today, to come back to New York or to Connecticut today. So share with us how you ended up in California and what you did out there and what you learned from that experience.
Oh gosh, I was in New York, so the financial industry was consolidating back in the late 80s, early 90s, and as I told you, I had this hybrid position. And unfortunately, when the markets turned, it was last in, first out, and I had just recently gotten there. So I was only there a year on this Wall Street firm before I got the call to come down on a Friday afternoon and say, bye-bye. You can't take your Rolodex with you. And I that was one of the best things that ever could have happened to me, because I suddenly realized that I'm not what I do, that I've got a lot more to offer than that. And I always wanted to go out west. There was something about the West Coast that always intrigued me. And still today, it does intrigue me in the sense that it's a very, it feels very open and receptive to new ideas, more so than the East Coast. The West Coast has always been sort of a leader in new ideas and embracing new ideas. And so when I got out there, I took the basic skills that I had, and I wound up working for a technology company, but I became something different. I was still a fearless phone warrior, and I used that to prospect to Fortune 500 companies and calling on the chief information officers and vice presidents of information technology to bring them new ideas in technology that they could use in their corporations.
What were some of the ideas that you might have?
Well, this was pre-Y2K, so that whole concept of looking at your systems and seeing what's going to click on and click off when 2000 happens became a big deal for a lot of people, and they started reevaluating all their information systems, and we helped them go through that big process. So going to the Y2K issue and for our millennials who don't know what happened, the heck happened,
who don't know what happened. So I am deemed on the cusp of I'm kind of like on the cusp of being a Gen X and a millennial. I grew up knowing that I was a Gen X, but I guess now it's 82 and up is millennial. So I'm a quote unquote millennial. But for those who were born after 2000 and don't understand Y2K. Y2K was when the year 2000 hit, and these computer systems weren't going to understand the numbers and everything. They weren't built properly, so all of these companies thought their computers were going to crash and their systems were going to crash, and the world was going to come to an end in the year 2000. So that's a little backstory on it. What I'm interested to hear is, because you were obviously involved in the technology and speaking with these executives that were very concerned as to what's going to happen when 2000 hits, right? I might have put an extra zero in there. What do you think was the real issue? Because I think from a media standpoint, and at the time I was only like 17 or 18, so I really didn't understand it very well. But I think from a media standpoint, we just understood it as these companies weren't set up for 2000, and when it hits, all their systems are going to crash. But I think you might have been behind the scenes and really understanding as to what was happening from a technology standpoint and from these companies, like you said, cleaning up their systems. What was really happening that they needed to prepare for 2000, if you have any insight in that?
It really was the date when it goes 00, because most of the embedded code was not 4-digit, it was 2-digit. And if something goes 00, what's going to happen? How will that computer handle that change? And there was all kinds of stories about, oh my God, the elevators are not going to work anymore, or goodness gracious. But in the end, what really happened? Not a lot. But you know what? Some things did happen. Some prisoners got released early because the computers didn't work properly. There was some instances of things that happened, but nothing major. No corporate information systems failed, to my knowledge.
So what was the fixing that you had to do in order to change? Was it just changing the system to 4-digit then?
It was a really major upgrade in the information systems for a lot of companies. A lot of big companies who had a lot of legacy systems. They didn't know what was going to happen, so they used it as an opportunity to make a major investment to upgrade their information systems throughout their company. What
was the reasoning to make it a 2-digit code and not any foresight that we're going to go to the year 2000? Was it just...
I don't know if they...
I mean, because the computer came out, in the 60s or the 50s? The first computer, right? It took up a whole room and everything, right?
Sure.
Took up a whole room. But in the 70s, it's become now something that people were more accustomed to, knew that it was going to be the future. And at that point, they go... It's only a few years that it's going to be 2000. They don't think to change anything. We'll get when we get there.
Yeah, I really don't know what was in the minds of a lot of people when they were making these. As we went from mainframes to minis to personal computers, but nothing really happened.
Somebody will figure it out for us.
Yeah,
it's kind of like how I operate, kind of. So this is what you did while you were in California, and you managed a team while you were there.
Yes, I started building up a team of salespeople. And that led to just my group was getting more successful on the West Coast. I was leading let me back up just a little bit. So for the companies that are information technology consultants, one of the issues is that a lot of their account executives tend to be very focused on technology, but not so much on sales, and particularly about being good at creating a business case for the technology. So that's where I came in. I was able to glean stories from successes that were occurring within the company across the U.S. and even internationally, and take those stories and then deliver them in my fashion to these senior executives who had the financial responsibility for buying and selling new technology. That wasn't a skill that really existed inside the company, but someone had the foresight to bring me on because they thought that I could deliver those messages. And that was separate from the account executives who were selling and managing technology projects and who really couldn't talk to the business side of a company who controlled the purse for new technology.
Yeah, which is, we hear about storytelling today so often, and now it's part of what we see for a lot of companies and entrepreneurs is about branding and their brand story and their brand messaging. And on social media, that's what it talks about a lot, is the story that you're sharing with your audience in order for them to buy from you. It's not just pitching or selling. It's what's your story, what's your brand. And it sounds like that's something that you developed for them. It's what I think is very interesting about that is that you kind of like changed, I guess, the culture of that company, because they were, I guess, engineers and felt that this is a solution that these people need, and I'm just going to tell them, you need this solution. but without a reasoning or a story that kind of drives the conversation. And so you developed a story for them, right?
I finesse the stories for them, yes.
So now I just need to, we'll end up cutting this part out. Sorry,
that's okay.
That thing drives me nuts. The recorder on there. So I'll just do that so we know where that is to cut that out. So you built a team while you were there. And what I'm interested in hearing about is how you built this team and who you looked for, because the culture of this business was a very straightforward culture, which was, we have account executives, we have a solution, and we're going to go to these executives and tell them about the solution, they're going to buy it. And that wasn't working. So they brought you in to change this culture, to share stories, to be able to reach out to these executives and share that story of why they should purchase this.
I wish I could tell you that team was underneath me. But the team actually turned out to be those account executives who were ingrained in selling technology and not selling business concepts. So I was simply trying to give them messages and stories about once they got inside the corporations that they could talk to the people on the ground and move those messages up so that the projects that we had could expand and continue.
Which is probably even harder than just hiring somebody new, because you got a new person's a clean slate. You could just tell them, here's the culture, we're sharing stories. But you're kind of taking people that are in their old ways and trying to tell them a new way. So
right.
How did you do that? How did you recreate inside of this organization a new culture of sales and on how to do this? What were some of your first steps that you did?
Well, everyone loves success. And when we had a new win, people want to know about it. Mm-hmm. And we had sales meetings weekly. And then, of course, we also had meetings quarterly. And I was invited to speak on those quarterlies. I was always present on the weekly calls. So I'd be adding tidbits about how I did this, how I did that. But on the quarterlies, I started creating more of a longer story about who I talked to, what I said, why I said it, how I set up the next meeting, how I brought in a subject matter expert. And then they started getting it. They started getting the message, and they started expanding their idea about what they can accomplish when normally they're so project focused.
Which I'm smiling here because it's another common theme that I hear amongst leaders like yourself, is that leading by example. Rather than just telling them, hey, you need to tell a story, you were sharing your success, you were sharing what you were doing, and you were sharing that information with the team. And from there, they said, okay, this guy's onto something. maybe I should listen to him.
Yeah, I've had that opportunity a number of times, going in reverse back to Wall Street. When I was having that success, doing something that none of the other salespeople were doing and none of the traders were doing, because I had this hybrid position, but I was putting money into the pockets of the salespeople because I was creating the idea. I got the demand from a third party. Normally, you'd have a first party and a second party. The first party is a buyer, a money manager, and the second party is either a money manager or the new issuing, investment banker. So you'd have a security that was trading back and forth. Well, I created a third party, the original issuer, buying back their own bonds. And that created something that most people were not focused on, right? They were simply buying and selling among their clients. And I created a third party demand for paper, this bond paper. And everyone said, oh my God, we got to work with you. And so the salespeople started learning my stories, and I was telling them how I did what I did.
Yeah, and it's also very important to understand, too, the generosity from you there is not generosity in a monetary fashion. But I think when we think about leaders, we don't understand that they need to be generous with the information, is that they need to share that step-by-step process. It's not just look at what I've accomplished. It's how did I accomplish it, and sharing that. And that's part of what you did too, is that you didn't just lead by example, but you also showed the step-by-step process, which again, when we talk about this podcast and you ask me why I'm doing it, that's why I'm doing it, is to share, to break down that step-by-step process for our entrepreneurs and business leaders out there, because sometimes we aren't aware of what that process is. We see success, but we don't know how to achieve it. We don't know how to get there.
Yeah, I think philosophically, some people believe the world is a zero-sum game, and if you take some, the next person gets less. Other people believe that it's ever expanding, and the bigger you make it, it's more for everybody.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's. I think that kind of, I've been wanting to go back to the golden rule with you, because that's one of my favorite ones, is to do unto others as others, and I really, really like that, because it goes back to what you just said there, which is you can give, you can give everything, and there's plenty to give. There's always more to give. There's always more to give. And I think that sometimes we feel, in sales at least, you feel that somebody's your competitor or there's competition. And I always felt like there really is no competition. There's a good thing to have a competition, and I think that there's good in that, of like striving to be the best or something. But I think when you're all working together to help others, and goes back to the golden rule, which is if my company or my job is to create or sell a solution to you, and I believe in that solution, and I believe that solution is going to help you as an individual or as a business or as whatever it is to do good for the world, then whether you buy it from me or buy it from my quote unquote competitor, I personally don't care. Because to me, the end game for me is that you buy that solution and that you make yourself better. Because by you making yourself better, you're going to do better for the world. Because as you know, in my intake form, I'm asking, how are you changing the world, right? And because that's really what I care about. So it goes back to that golden rule.
Yes, because I'm a registered investment advisor, I want that industry, the fiduciary RIAs, to be extremely successful. Mm-hmm. I want that model to be consumed by individuals and families across America and the world, because it's better for everybody than the old models.
Yeah. I want to go into that, because that's a perfect segue into your company, which is Compound Wealth Advisors. And so you left California, and is that when you came back to Connecticut or New York? Which one did you go to?
Came back to Connecticut.
Connecticut, yes. Right? You came back to Connecticut. And is that when you founded Compound Wealth Advisors?
It took a couple years. I wasn't sure if I wanted to. I knew I didn't want to go back to working for inside of a corporation, and I knew I was back in the world of finance somehow. To me, the Northeast was still the world of finance, and the world had changed a lot from the time that I had left. It wasn't any more of the commission-driven environments that I worked in weren't the same by far, but I still loved the strategy of working in the markets. I still love managing investments. I've been a chess player for a long time, and to me, it's always just like that. It's a never-ending game, and it's always a little different. But it's the same game in general, but it's always a little different. And I want to take that passion and help people at the same time, because I saw so much of people that were not doing it well, and they were consumed by their own biases. There's a whole field called behavioral finance, and it talks about hundreds of biases that hold people back from making good decisions. And I've been managing my own money and some friends and family for many years, and I had worked through a lot of these biases. I had to go against the grain. I had to buy at the time when my heart said, no, I can't take it anymore. The pain is too much. That's when you exactly at the time to buy. So you had to work against your own emotions sometimes, but you have to learn how to do that over time. Mm-hmm. And basically what happened when I came back east, more and more people were asking me to help them. And I said, geez, I could just turn this hobby into a profession, and that's when I started.
You said it took a little while. What was, and I understand it was probably some not necessarily wanting to go back to Wall Street kind of feeling, but outside of that, what were some of the holdbacks
Sure.
to starting? What were some of the things that you had to work through, some challenges?
Yeah, a lot of it is momentum. So the very last thing that I was doing in California was I was selling solar projects, large scale solar projects. And I saw myself as a solar salesperson, and I was in that industry. So I had to go through this process of, no, I'm not that anymore. I want to go back to what I really enjoy. The one thing I could do ad infinitum without ever getting bored of was investments. It wasn't solar, and it wasn't being an IT guy back in California. It really was investments, and that's where I belonged. But at the same time, I wanted to bring something new to it. I wanted to be really helpful to other people. And that industry is still relatively young. But it didn't exist when I left New York. It certainly is here now.
It's so funny because that's what we talked about earlier on with the fascination of the coin, is that it brought you right back. You went back to your coin. Do you still have that coin, by the way? Do you know where it is?
I may have it. I may have it. I'm not sure because I had a growing collection at one time of those coins, but then I sold the collection. Okay. So I'm not sure if I had kept that one.
I feel like you need to have one of those coins that symbolize that. I mean, because that's the fascination. That's what really where it all derived from.
Right.
So part of what you shared with me and what we opened with is where I really want to understand, and you talked a little bit about it there, where you're on a mission to make financial advice a noble profession. And there's a couple things in there that I want to break down and try to understand. Is one, and because I feel this is probably the easiest one to break down because I'm kind of in the financial industry as an insurance broker, or actually that's what I'm considered as the financial industry, is why we have to say it's a noble profession. Why do we have to take away a negative stigma from it and let people know that it is a noble profession? I have my take on it, but I'd much prefer, and I think our audience would much prefer to hear your take on that.
You know, there's good and bad everywhere.
Sure.
There are people that take advantage of having more information than the next guy. And the industry was set up, the financial industry and many parts of the financial industry have been set up entrepreneurship-wise with large companies, with commissioned salespeople, and you owe an obligation, a loyalty to your company before you have that loyalty to your customer. So you're in this conflict between wanting to do well for your client, but you also have a loyalty to your company. And if you're one of those commissioned people who have to hit their numbers every quarter, you're in an environment that may not always be to the best interests of your clients.
Which we would call your fiduciary responsibility.
Right. But that wasn't a legal mandate until recently, where we see that now, with where advisors who are managing money have, when they're state registered or licensed, they have a legal responsibility to be a fiduciary.
I'm not a historian on this, nor do I claim to be one or very knowledgeable, but was that something that law that you're talking about, was that after the big crash of 2008 and what happened there and why? Is that part of why that? My understanding, the industry really began sometime in the early 90s, but it didn't really gain momentum until, you're right, into the 2000s. And you see a lot of teams that used to work for these brokerage firms starting to leave and set up their own independent shops away from those brokerage houses. And then that's when they had to create these kind of rules of like, hey, got to do right by the client here.
Right. And there's still, I'm not saying it's still perfect now. There's still nefarious characters out there, and you still have to do your homework and make sure you're talking to someone you're comfortable with.
And so why do you make it your mission, or why do you feel it's your mission to make financial advising a noble profession? Why is that your mission? And those were your words that you shared with me. So I thought that they were very special to talk about today.
It's I have this, I can't stand watching people getting taken advantage of. It just drives me crazy. And it drives me crazy even when people are not even being efficient with how they run their own money. There's a lot of knowledge that people don't have, and they're very quick to give it away a lot of times to people who profess to have a lot more knowledge. But if you do your homework and you find people who are willing to talk to you about, this is a way to do it, this is a way, it doesn't have to be overly complicated. I know taxes can be complicated. I know that investing sounds so crazy at times because it sounds, you're reading these headlines every day and the market's up, the market's down. Oh my God, how do I invest? It doesn't have to be that way. And you can find an advisor who can put money in buckets so that you know how much should be invested for the long term, how much should be invested for the short term, and they can put you on a glide path. So it doesn't have to be this something that keeps you up at night.
Right. And when we're talking about this, I think a lot of times we're thinking about somebody that's retiring or looking for retirement, especially when we're talking about retirement income and things like that. But really, and I guess I'll pose this question to you, is who should be thinking about retirement and who should be thinking about these investments that you're talking about, like age group and I would say when I say demographic, I mean it more in terms of like business, like where are they at in their business? Are they starting a business? Are they entrenched in a business? What would you say would be the right time to do it?
The earlier the better.
Right.
Honestly, there's math that works so well in your favor the sooner you start. It's called compounding, right? Rule of 72. How fast can you double your money? Well, if you can grow your money at 8% a year, 8 goes into 72 9 times, you double your money in 9 years. Think about if you put that money to work when you're 20 years old, if you can save some money, that money will double and then double and double again. The sooner you start, the better. The better. So yes, you should have some basic financial education. And I'd love to see more and more financial education at earlier and earlier ages. And in the high schools, they should be teaching finance and basic finance.
I definitely agree with that because it's taken me a very long time to learn anything about it. A question I have for you from the, let's say, entrepreneur side, because from the business leader side, a lot of times you have the company that they work for or corporation they work for, they set up a 401k, they invest in it, and they match, they do all these different things. I would definitely say max out on the match because that's free money coming your way. And you get the 401k. And that's an easy way to look at it. And I'm sure that you have other advice for them. But the question I have for you is more towards the entrepreneur who doesn't have a 401k set up and doesn't have this corporation looking out for them to match or anything like that. And the other issue that they have where the question stems from is they have bills to pay. And they're debating between taking out a business loan where they're going to pay a certain percentage on, anywhere as low as 3%, as high as 20% or higher. And they're looking at that, and then they're saying, hey, you know what? I used to have this corporate job where I banked all this money in a 401k, which is now an IRA, and I could maybe take some money out of there and certain fees and everything. What advice do you have for them in terms of, and I guess it's a twofold question, which is, one, is that a good move? Take a loan versus take some money out of their IRA? And then two, should they be plugging some money away in an investment fund versus putting it into their business? I think that's a very hard decision for an entrepreneur of, I need to make the monthly bills. And then, I also want to put $20, $100, $150, whatever it is on a monthly basis into this retirement fund or investment fund. I know it's a very complicated, multi-level question there, but I think with your head nodding, you could answer some of it.
It's going to be different for everybody in terms of their comfort level. And some people are just great risk takers and they're very well thought through. And maybe they even are great salespeople and they know how to pitch, and it's OPM, right? Other people's money that they use as seed capital. So they're never too stretched personally. But then there's other people who don't even become entrepreneurs until they've already taken care of many of those things. I mean, Henry Ford didn't become out as an entrepreneur until his late 50s.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot of ways of doing it. And I've seen people in their 20s go off on their own. I've seen people wait until they're retired.
Mm-hmm. So there's no right way in what you're saying of like whether you take some money out, borrow it against your IRA, or invest while you're also trying to start a business. It really has to do with their risk tolerance and if they have the capital to do it.
Yeah, I will say one thing though. We sit back, we read all these great successes that happen, for example, in Silicon Valley. I can tell you I have hundreds of t-shirts at home from all the companies that didn't make it. Mm-hmm. And there's many, many more of those than there are the successes.
Right. Yeah, it's definitely something that you hear a lot about. I've heard so many founders speak about that of I cashed out my 401k and went off and started my business. But you don't really hear the stories of how they might have failed. The other story that you don't really hear of, which is, I guess, maybe more importantly, the question that I'm asking, which is, as the entrepreneur is growing in their business, is how do they find a way to set some money aside for the future? How do they find a way to develop that? Is that something that that you believe they should start right away, or is that something that they can gradually work into?
I think it's a great question. I would love to see people take care of the basics before they mm-hmm. Use any of their own personal money to go off. And you don't want to risk so much that you have nothing to fall back on.
Right.
And I think there's, particularly in America, where we have to worry about our healthcare costs, and you have to have money set aside for those issues.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So it's situational, is what it sounds like.
Yeah, it's a broad topic, and I'm not even sure. We could probably talk about that for hours.
We certainly could.
Because there's different types of entrepreneurs. You could be an entrepreneur in simply just buying a vending machine and putting it at the local golf course, right? Or you could be an entrepreneur and you're setting off and grabbing, looking for seed money, and mm-hmm. then you work with a team, and then it gets bigger, and then you go after VC money, and so there's so many different levels of it, and how big you want your business to be, and how fast you want to grow.
Mm-hmm. What's one question you would ask that entrepreneur to think about, to consider on which direction to take their business in that moment there, what you just shared there, of one direction of a vending machine at a golf course, or the other direction of seed money? What's something that you would tell them to ask themselves?
I would ask themselves, I think, how confident you are in what you're doing.
In your vision.
Mm-hmm. And how much passion and energy you're going to bring to it.
Right. I think that's great. My final question that I like to ask about is, what's something that, looking back on your entire career, on everything that you've done, what's something that, if you could have done it differently, what would it be? Or, and you could take it however way you want, or what's something that you've a failure in your past that you might have learned something great from?
I probably have a lot of both of those.
I'm sure.
I think that to your first question, I would say be careful not to live your life to someone else's dogma. Mm-hmm. And what I mean by that is, I think each of us is unique. And the more you know yourself and trust yourself, you can follow your own passions to your future success. And you don't have to do it in the same way that other people have done it.
I think that that's wonderful. I think that if anybody listens to this entire podcast, fast forward to the last 3 minutes just now, because that was perfect. I think that speaks to what we talked about earlier, which is fascination, passion, all of that stuff is bringing it all. And that's what's going to help you become successful as an entrepreneur or as a business leader and anywhere. Mm-hmm. Stuart, where can people contact you? Of course, all of that will be in the show notes for contact information. But if you want to share your website and any other forms of communication, please do now.
Sure. Feel free to visit my website. The address is www.compoundwa.com. And my contact information is there. And you can send me a contact submission note. Tell me what is an issue for you, and I'd be happy to see if I can solve it.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for coming on the show today and sharing your insight and advice for people. I really, really appreciate it. It's been great.
Thanks for the invitation, Michael.
Cool. You're welcome. Thank you for listening to The Michael Esposito Show. For show notes, video clips, and more episodes, go to michaelespositoinc.com/podcast.